Guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about buying occupied properties. What does occupied mean? Buying an occupied property means exactly what it sounds like. Buying a property that already has a tenant inside, okay? Now, buying occupied property, when I look at it, it's one of two things, okay? It's purchasing property where there's a tenant in it or it's occupied by the seller, but they'll be out at the time of closing, or it's buying occupied property with a tenant, with a renter, that is going to stay. You're buying basically a turnkey investment property. Do me a favor. If you've ever thought about buying a property that's occupied, that has a tenant in it, I want you to comment below, tell me where in the US you were looking at buying, and tell me what that tenant was paying for rent, okay? If the tenant wasn't, you don't know what the rent was, tell me what city and what state it was in, okay? Now, getting back to it. Say we are buying a rental property that's occupied. What are the things that we need? There are some basic things we need, because if we buy a rental property that is already cash flowing, I put these in quotations because I put turnkey and I put cash flowing, because the reality is sometimes you don't know. The seller can feed you any line of crap that they want to, and then all of a sudden you own it and you're stuck with the tenant. For a lot of first-time investors, I don't necessarily recommend, actually I just thought of something while I'm sitting here. I don't recommend buying occupied unless it's the absolute perfect deal, and perfect deals do come along. I see them often. But 9 out of 10 occupied rental properties are no bueno. Okay, sorry, ignore this for now. Okay, ignore that for now. Now, let's talk about the things that you need. Okay, number one, single-handedly, the most important thing you need is the lease, okay? If you are looking to buy a property that has a tenant already in it, it's a rental property that has a tenant, you need a copy of the lease, okay? I want to know when this lease started. I want to know when this lease expires. I want to know what the tenant's paying in utilities, because in every single lease agreement, it'll say, okay, the tenant is paying electric, water, but they're not paying sewage, okay? We want to make sure they're paying everything that they're paying, right? We want to know that going in. Another thing that all lease agreements say is what the security deposit is, because the security deposit, when I purchase the home, that's going to get transferred to me, okay? So I want to know, I want to make sure that security deposit comes to me. So what is it, okay? Another important thing in the lease, what's provided? What's provided for the tenant? If the tenant moved into this unit and a washer and dryer was not provided, and then I take over the unit and the tenant goes, hey, my washer and dryer went out. Oh, well, the old landlord provided that. You need to replace this. You don't want to get stuck with that, okay? You don't want to get stuck. Tenants will do that. They'll try to trick you. They know that the property just got sold and now has a new owner. So we have to make sure that up front, we know when this tenant moved in, what were they provided? Okay, they were provided a refrigerator, a stove, that's it? Okay, that's all that we need to provide, okay? That's huge. So a lease, extremely important. When we see a lease, we can also see the start date of the lease. So if the property was purchased if the lease was signed in 2018, right, and it's 2022, we know that it's already been renewed a couple times. That's good. That means that tenant has probably been a good tenant, okay? Or they're an unbelievably awful squatter, right? But there are ways we can go about that also. We know that they're probably a good tenant, because in order for a lease to be renewed, both parties have to agree on the renewal, okay? So if that has been renewed, it means that most likely that tenant's been pretty good. Now, when it comes to Section 8, we also want a HUD, okay? A HUD packet, which is all the information. This is what I wrote in. We're going to get back to this in a minute. I wrote this in because the HUD packet is going to talk all about what the tenant pays for rent every single month, what the government stipend is per month, okay? That's huge, because I can look at a lease right now. I don't know, I can see that the rent is $1,000 a month, but if it's a Section 8 property, I don't know how much the government's paying and how much the tenant's paying. The HUD discloses all of that, okay? And that's huge, huge, huge. It's so important because then I can say, okay, if I buy this Section 8 property and the government's paying 100% of the rent every single month, it's a home run. Now I still need to do my due diligence, but that's a very, very important part of it, okay? Now, another important part of this is the rent roll. I want to see how this property has been doing over the past, since in its life, in its rental life. So I want to see a list. I want to see everything about this property. I want to see if a tenant moved in January 2020, I want to see January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Okay, of 2020. I want to see all of it in 2021. I want to see every single dollar that came in. Okay, maybe they were late in March 2021, but it carried over. They paid that balance in April of 2021. So they missed 1 month and they made it up the following month. I want to know as much about this property as possible. Okay, incredibly important. We went over the HUD, the maintenance. Okay, I want to know every bit of maintenance that has been done on this property. Now, I want the completed maintenance. So I want to know where there have been failure points in the past. I want to know what has been done in the past. That's important, okay? But I also want to know about deferred maintenance, meaning what maintenance is going to be deferred to me when I purchase the property, okay? So what surprises are there going to be when I take over and now it's my responsibility? So I want to know about completed maintenance. You have to get that from the seller, okay? Your real estate agent will do that. But deferred maintenance, a lot of times we have to find our own. So how do we do that? Well, as we're going through the due diligence process, we get a property under contract. We send out our contractor to the property and they quote it just like anything else. We're getting quotes before we buy it, whether it's occupied or not occupied, whether it's vacant, whether it's had a tenant for 20 years. A lot of properties have deferred maintenance. So, for example, if a seller is like, you know what, I have to do a $6,000 roof repair, I don't want to spend the $6,000. I'd rather just sell it. It's a good time for me to sell. That is a huge, huge common situation in real estate. Or something happens like, oh, the HVAC's about to blow. I want to sell the house. It needs some work. Let's just sell it. It doesn't owe me any money. I'm making a ton of money. Let's just put it on the market and just sell it. The new seller now has to do all the new maintenance and put the new HVAC in, okay? That's fine. It's all good. It's just called deferred maintenance, okay? I want to know what that is because I want to know what my costs are going to be the second I buy it, okay? Now, that is if we want to keep our tenant in the unit. When it comes to purchasing a property that is occupied but the tenant's going to be out by the time of closing, this is extremely important. We are not, and I can't harp on this enough, we are not going to purchase any property that has a tenant in it, okay? I'm going to give you guys an example. About 10 days ago, I had a client that closed on a property for $45,000, okay? The tenant was the seller. They were the owner of the property. My client was closing at 9 a.m. on Friday. And the seller was told everybody, he said, yep, the day before, said, yeah, I'll be out of here at 3 p.m. tomorrow, okay? So my client was gonna own the property at 9 a.m. and that seller was gonna stay there until 3 p.m. Absolutely, unequivocally, no. We will not purchase a property that has a tenant inside. When we close, that place better be vacant. I am not dealing with it and neither should you. What you absolutely don't want, guys, and I talk on this channel all the time about you don't know mistakes unless you've made them. You can't fathom the things that people will do in this world, especially in this business, in real estate. I've purchased properties before where I've heard that same thing and I buy the home and now I buy the home, it's mine, I own it, and the tenant's supposed to move out and my contractor shows up the next day to start rehab and nothing's moved out and they're sitting on the couch eating a bag of chips, watching something on TV on a Wednesday afternoon. Absolutely not. before we close, on closing day, 3 hours before closing, someone better be at that property, knocking on the door, looking in the windows, making sure that it is completely empty. It'll still have a lockbox on the door usually. Have someone go in, your agent, your contractor, somebody, open that thing up, walk through it, make sure that everybody's out, okay? A lot of places do what's called a final walkthrough, meaning before you close, you understand what's going on at the house. Sometimes people don't do final walkthroughs. That's okay too. We just have to make sure that the tenant is out of the house when we close. We're not buying anything that someone is still in. I've been crushed by it before. I refuse to let anybody else get crushed by it, okay? Sounds like common sense, but people are like, yeah, he said he'll move out later. He'll be out. And then guess what? You're trying to evict a squatter. I'm not being dramatic. It happens, okay? Don't do it. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Guys, if you haven't already, drop a comment below. I want to know about property that you've looked at before that has had occupied tenants that A, you've either called about or were interested in and never followed up with. Where were they? What cities were they in? Give me some details about them. I'm looking forward to hearing about them below. We'll see you next time.